Hey, welcome back. My name's Justin. Today I'm doing a review on the DWE. This is the first ever wireless electronic drum set, and it's probably the most innovative electronic drum set I've played in a really, really long time. And it's not that like the individual features that I'm using here have never been tried before or haven't been floating around in the ether, but somehow DW has grabbed all of these cool ideas and they've put them into one product and they've stuck the landing, which is incredibly difficult to do. Now, because of the extremes that this drum set is definitely aiming for, I don't think this drum set will be for everybody. This isn't going to sell like a Roland TD-17 or an Alesis Nitro. It's not a drum set for the masses. It's a very specialized electronic drum set that does some very cool things. Some people will love it, some people will probably not like it. But this drum set is really, really fun to play. But first, today's video is brought to you by EdrumCenter.com. If you're shopping for electronic drums, you gotta go check out EdrumCenter first. They're a drum store based in Tennessee that just focuses on electronic drums. So go check them out with the discount link in the description below today. It also helps support 65 Drums and helps me continue doing what I do. So the unboxing experience for this drum set is oddly similar to unboxing an acoustic drum set, because really that's what it is. It's a high-end DW shell pack. Here are the specs on screen if you want to know all the nerdy details. The batter heads come in the box, you can switch them out. The triggers are made to come out of the shells, so it's kind of trying to be an all-in-one drum set that does both acoustic and electronic really well. Most electronic drum companies, understandably, they don't try to use really fancy, nice quality shells because they're just supposed to live 24/7 as an electronic drum set. DW decided to skip that and just go with high-end shells. The sizes of the drum set that I'm borrowing from DW right here is 8x10 for the high tom, 9x12 for tom 2. The floor tom is 14x16, the snare is 6.5x14, and it's incredibly heavy, and the kick drum is 16x22. They also sell a smaller 4-piece shell pack version, which I have not played, that comes in 9x12, 12x14, 5x14, and 14x20 for the kick drum. The drum set comes in 5 different finishes. The one that I've got right here temporarily is, I think it's called Black Galaxy. It's got little flakes of gold and silver. It shifts a little bit depending on the lighting that you throw at it. And then I've also played a different DWE drum set at a drum store called Forks Drum Closet in Nashville, and that has, I think it's called Black Cherry or something. The cymbals here are a 2-piece 14-inch set. You've got 2 16-inch crashes and an 18-inch ride. Everything is 3 zones, so you get a bell on everything, the crashes, the ride, and the hi-hat. And everything is 360 triggering, so if they spin around, it doesn't really matter. These are full metal, as you can probably tell. This isn't some sort of fancy, covering on a piece of rubber or a spray paint or something like that. It's actually legit metal cymbals. Are they loud? Yes. These are definitely going to be louder than rubber. The snare drum and the floor tom, they use Roland's 3-ply mesh head. Then the high toms, they use Roland's 2-ply mesh head. So basically, you get a different feel when you're playing on the high toms versus the floor tom and the snare drum. I really like them. They feel very, very good, not overly reboundy, which is key on something like a floor tom in order for it to feel right. And you have control over how much of that pitch it bends. On the snare drum, it also has pitch bending, but you have to toggle it back and forth. Either you can get pitch bending on the snare drum head if you press down with your elbow, or you can get positional sensing. It's one or the other. There's also a snare throw-off, which is really, really fun. Electronic drums normally don't have that. The last normal electronic drum set I played that had this was the Yamaha DTX 950K. Great drum set. It was like a little dial on the snare drum that you could change like how much snare wire there was, I think. So love this. It feels silky smooth. It works really, really well. And DW is smart because you can assign the snare throw off to either be snares off, or you can have it as a whole separate snare drum sample instead, because you're just triggering a MIDI note, essentially. The kick drum feels really, really good. It's not overly bouncy. It's very, very satisfying to play on. It's got this woven mesh head I've never seen this kind of mesh head pattern before, so I think that they commissioned this mesh head specifically for this drum set. I've never seen it anywhere else. They've also pre-applied a double beater kick drum patch out of the box, so if the kick drum pedal that you currently own is only felt, You don't have to go buy a patch separately and put that on in order to protect the mesh head and not melt right through that thing. When it comes to resonant heads, the high toms and the floor tom, they use an acoustic resonant head. So that makes these sound a little bit more musical to people around you. Like the floor above, when I was first playing this drum set, my brother said that he noticed that the drums rang out a little bit more. They sounded a little bit nicer, I guess. And I totally get that. The snare drum, though, it has a second mesh head as the resonant head. I believe that's there because it doesn't really make any sense to have a resonant acoustic head if you're not going to have snare drum wires. So they just decided to leave it as a mesh. Now, when it comes to these metal cymbals, they have the classic pros and cons that metal electronic cymbals have had since, 2003 or whenever the first metal electronic cymbals came out. They've kind of gone in and out of popularity over the years. I think they first emerged like in the early 2000s with companies like Heart Dynamics, then custom builders such as Jobecki and Field. We saw Alesis and Pearl take a crack at it. They both used a third-party cymbal vendor that, sold it under their different brand names for a while. Every once in a while, a new company pops up doing it. Like AE Hybrid, that company's coming out with some full metal electronic cymbals very soon. They sort of are always in the background. They've been around, but the majority of electronic drummers probably don't play them on the day-to-day. In my opinion, metal electronic cymbals have a couple of things going for them and a couple of things going against them. On the plus side, metal electronic cymbals, they look better than rubber cymbals. They just do. If you're doing a drum cover, if you're playing live, these just look nicer. The second thing they have going for them is you're getting a more true-to-life stick rebound from them. You can't really replicate the feel of playing the bell of an acoustic cymbal with a piece of rubber over it, especially on the bell zone. These do feel more true to life in that way. On the downside, these sound more annoying, and I'm just going to be real with you guys. That, in my opinion, that's not a pleasant sound. And when you're playing through headphones, because this is a higher pitch than rubber cymbals, this cuts through your headphones a little bit more, and also it can clash with the pitch of the cymbal recording that you're hearing, from the samples on the laptop. It is definitely louder. If you're in the same room, it's kind of annoying. If you're on a different floor, it's not going to make or break your experience. Like if somebody's playing this drum set and I'm upstairs, it's not really that terrible, and I wouldn't mind somebody playing it for an hour. The second thing to know is that these don't sway exactly the same as acoustic cymbals because they're heavier, and also they got these like rubber cymbal felts here. You got to make sure you don't really tighten this stuff down very much, otherwise they're barely going to move at all. So if I tighten this, down like that, look at that, it's barely moving at all. So if you were to buy this, I wouldn't really try to tighten this much because you want to make sure it really sways around a lot and acts more like a cymbal. And the last thing to mention is that these don't really have any give. So when you're crashing into the hi-hats and when you're crashing into these, because they're like 2 to 3 times thicker, maybe 3 or 4 times thicker than a regular acoustic cymbal with that like piece of plastic on the bottom of it, the cymbal doesn't like warp on each hit. It doesn't dissipate the energy like that. So you don't have a ton of give when you're crashing into these. They can produce an uncanny valley effect in some people. I'm not trying to be a hater of metal electronic cymbals, but when they look so close to acoustic cymbals, but then you have something slightly off, it kind of triggers that sort of feeling in your brain that you had when you watched an all CGI movie back in 2012, where you were looking at humans that didn't look quite right. That's sometimes what happens with metal electronic cymbals. Rubber cymbals also have a downside where they don't look as nice, they don't feel quite the same as hitting a piece of metal. Everything has downsides. This drum set is trying to live on the extreme end of the margin of electronic drums, where you've got pad-based really small electronic drums, kind of like keyboards that don't have weighted keys and they're really, really tiny. Then you got keyboards that are trying their best to look like a baby grand, like this Roland one right here. That's kind of what DW is doing with this electronic drum set. So next up is trigger accuracy. The drums specifically are really, really fantastic. Even though they've got a lot going on, like pitch bending, the fact that I can mute the drums just by pressing my hand on the toms, that's great. Snare drum has positional sensing, it's got the snare throw off, it can do rim shot, rim click, side stick, because it can sense the pressure of your palm as you're playing cross stick. It's doing a lot of stuff, but it's doing it all very accurately. And then the kick drum, which is admittedly the most simple part of any electronic drum set, they still have good triggering on the kick drum as long as you dial in the settings. But mostly out of the box, you don't really have to change almost anything. Now, when it comes to the cymbals, I wouldn't say that these have the level of polish that the drums have. The drums are darn near perfect. The cymbals, though, every once in a while, they do something weird, and it reminds me that I'm playing electronic cymbals. Like, for example, like on the edge of the hi-hat, every once in a while, I've had like a dropout. There may be times where you'll have to adjust the balance between the bow and the bell if you play really hard on the bell. This happened to me once on the crash. I'd hit the bell really hard, and instead of triggering a bell hit, it would trigger like a crashing hit. Turns out these cymbals are constructed different than normal electronic cymbals. Here's the inside of a normal E-cymbal. So it's a switch, it's a piezo, and then there's another switch for the bell. The DW cymbals are using a more unique combination. They're using FSR and then 2 piezos. And then on the sound side of things, on the hi-hat, at least with one of the kits I was playing really fast between the bow and the edge, like the abruptness of the sound change and maybe not sustaining as long as I'd like. Maybe it's a setting adjustment I need to go make or fine tune, but at least with the presets, I feel like they could smooth out a little bit and really dial in the hi-hats a little bit more on the software side. Something a little bit more concerning though is that I did have the hi-hat completely turn off on me once. There was just like some sort of firmware bug because it turned itself all the way off. It stopped communicating, and even the light on the bottom, I think that stopped, lighting up as I hit it. So I removed the battery and then I put the battery back in, and all of a sudden it immediately, was working and pairing up with the computer again. So because of that, I think this is a software related bug that they can fix in a firmware patch. And apparently they're always working on firmware patches, so it probably will be addressed in the next thing. But that sort of situation where the hi-hat stopped working on me and I had to remove the battery and get a screwdriver, that situation really hit home to me, the fact that this is still a Generation 1 product and things like this can occur. What I'm coming to realize is that whenever you sign up to buy the first product that a company's ever made in a brand new category they've never tried before, and they're doing something ambitious that other companies haven't really tried as well at the same time, you're kind of signing up for little hiccups that come along with that. If you need something that's been continuously massaged and worked on since the 80s, then buy the V8706. That one's really, really fine-tuned and flushed out and everything. There's like almost no problems with that drum set. This one, though, is DW's first ever product in this category, unless you count that kick drum pedal they made back in like the 90s or something. This is their first time ever making an electronic drum set, and they're trying some very difficult to pull off stuff. So I still want to give them the benefit of the doubt, even though the cymbals aren't quite where I want them to be yet. I think with firmware patches, they definitely could get there. They're just not quite there yet. Okay, so next up, let's talk about the overall range of this drum set. Obviously, you need to have that receiver, and all the drums are wireless. They're only going to be able to go so far before they lose connection. But exactly how far can you get away with removing your laptop from the room the drums are in? What I'm going to do is run a test. I'll have the drums playing with the laptop, then I'll move the laptop outside the house, and then I'll put it in my car and see if it's still connected in the driveway. So I don't know about you, but I thought that test was really, really impressive. The very fact that I can put this in a car outside of a house and then still continue to play this in a basement, that is amazing to me, and it just shows that you can put these drums in a separate room from the computer if that need ever arises. So anyway, after you've chosen a drum set, you've unboxed it, you might be wondering how the drum set even works. Essentially, you have a little hub that all the drums talk to. Every single drum and cymbal, they have a tiny little processor, and they're always on. There is no on-off switch. They're on in the way that a TV remote is on, where you press a button and it transmits a signal, but other than that, it's never really doing anything. So it barely, sips power. They go for about 1 to 2 years, depending on how much you play the drums. So anyway, you have this tiny little hub that receives the MIDI data and then sends that to your drum plugin on your computer. Then you have a tiny little, I guess, audio interface, a little headphone amp thing. So you plug your headphones into this guy, and then you have two right and left outputs that can go to a drum amp or front of house if you want to do that instead of doing direct outs in a different way. And there's even a little mix input. So if you want to play to your cell phone instead of having YouTube music open in the background on your computer, you can plug your headphones and your cell phone directly into this hub. Really, really smart. So anyway, here's how you actually set the drum up. What you do is you open this little app called DWE Control. This is your trigger interface that lives on the inside of your computer. So you press this pair button, you hit the drum, and now it's paired. That's really all that it is. And then for calibration, you hit this little calibrate drum button, and then you hit the rim. I've got a velocity control curve here that I can mess around with like that, really dial in exactly how it responds to my playing. Not only for the entire hi-hat, but the bow zone, the edge zone, the bell, and then the pedal right here. You also have all your standard stuff like sensitivity and retrigger cancel. You can also just tell the drum set that a cymbal is a drum, or a drum is a cymbal, or change the order of the toms, or anything like that. You'll notice that all the drums and cymbals actually have a tiny little blue LED light. That's just to let you know that when you hit the drum, it's actually turned on, it's actually sending you a signal. You only really need that during initial setup, and then you have a little button to turn off that light. Probably helps you with battery life, which again, will run you about 1 to 2 years depending on how much you play. Thankfully, there's also a battery indicator on the app itself. So if you have 1 bar left, that means you've got like 2 months of use left. Now keep in mind, I am not the expert on these different programs because I've not been given access to the manual. I believe they were still editing the manual while I was like doing my review stuff with this drum set. So I am not claiming to be the expert on either of these apps, and forgive me if I get something slightly wrong here. Now, in case you're wondering what kind of computer the DW recommends you use, here's the system requirements that they sent me. They really don't want you to use an older, crummy computer with this to get the best latency response and the best overall experience. With this Apple M2 laptop that they're letting me borrow for the sake of this video, because I do happen to have a very old MacBook that was not up to snuff for this program. Here's how fast it will load. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's 5 seconds. And if I switch from the Almond kits over to Core Tight, 1, 2, now that's like 2 seconds. I guess it kind of depends on how big the preset is. Some of these kits are huge and then other ones are significantly smaller. It's the number of gigabytes that it takes to load that individual kit inside of your computer. This is a really nice drum plugin. It's kind of like Steam Slate Drums and Superior Drummer Had a Baby. It's actually really good. I like the mixing of this. You can tell that they kind of mixed this for drummers to play along with instead of it being plopped into a song as a ready mixed kit. Because a lot of times if you use some drum plugins, you'll notice that they crank the volume of like the kick and the snare, and then the cymbals, the hi-hat, you can barely hear it for some reason. Actually the cymbals are up. And so that lets me know that a lot of the stuff is pre-mixed for drummers to hear themselves actually playing. Something that I really like about this software is that if like I click on a drum, I go over here to Kit Designer, then I click Info on one of the snare drums, it'll tell me not only the exact kind of snare drum it is, it tells me the shell type, it tells me the size, it tells me the drum head they used, and all the microphones. Look at all these mics they used to record this. You also can look at this drum set in the kit view or the cell mode, as you're probably used to seeing now. As far as I'm aware, this software, or at least the hub, I'm not sure if it's both or just the hub, you can connect 30 drums and cymbals to this hub wirelessly. Something else I really like about this software is just the sheer amount of control I have over every single zone. I can control the pitch, the length, the fade. I can control all of that for every single zone. Let's say, for example, I want to pitch up the bell. I can do that separate from the rest of the cymbal. At least that's my understanding. The mixer section is pretty good. It doesn't give you like a full mini DAW inside of it like Superior Drummer 3 does, but it gives you pretty much everything that you really need. And if you need, ultra detailed stuff, then you can just use this inside of a DAW and then add extra effects to the different channels because you can route everything. Like this instrument is the kick drum. I can, decide where it goes. If you want to have direct outs with this drum set, by the way, you're going to need to buy a massive audio interface with a ton of direct outputs on the back of it. And then you have to route every single channel on where it's going to go on that giant audio interface. And that's what you can send to front of house. That's one of the downsides of this drum set, by the way. Usually when you spend this amount of money, you're getting a massive drum module that has all the inputs and outputs you could ever want. With this drum set, though, in addition to having to buy a laptop to run the drum set, you also have to buy a big audio interface if you need individual direct outs. So just be aware of that. Now, when it comes to individual sounds, here's how they lay it out. So under Kit Designer, you have each individual kit, and then there's the drum that you selected. So if I click on this Slingerland kit, and because I've got the kick drum selected on this menu, I see 3 kick drums. It's all the same kick drum, by the way, but they've just switched out the kick drum beater. So if I click on this, I'll see that this is the plastic beater. This one right here is the felt beater, and then this one's like a fluffy beater. These are really nice, rich sounds. A lot of natural sounds, some more processed, like, throw it right in a song sort of mix sounds. I really like playing with these. Sounds punchy, sounds modern. I really, really appreciate having to use like actual good sounding drums instead of like crappy drum module sounds. And maybe I'm saying this because I just got done reviewing an Alesis Nitro Max, but it is what it is. By the way, there's also a little plus button over here. So if I click on this, you've got the X-Pad stuff. You can use this for layering. So you can actually bring in round robin, multi-layered samples into this thing, and you can assign all that stuff. This software is actually very, very in-depth. Now, in case you're wondering, yes, you can actually buy this plugin separately, and you can even use this with a different electronic drum set. You could literally go buy a Yamaha kit and then use a DW plugin with it. There's a whole CC settings menu thing right here. As you can tell, it's got the snare drum selected, so we've got center, we've got edge. If we click on the hi-hat, all of a sudden the menu gets way more complicated because you have articulations for like all the different levels of open on the edge and also the bow zone. You can write in the values right here. In my opinion, it would have been nicer if they used a slider because I don't want to have to type in all this crap, but it is very detailed and you can really dial all this stuff in. Okay, so next up, let's talk about the price tag, who this drum set is for and who is probably not for. This drum set is incredibly expensive. I'm playing the middle of the road one, and I'm afraid to break it or scratch it because it costs $9,000. It starts at $7,400 and goes all the way up to $10,100, depending on which variation of this that you get. But it can go all the way past that $10,000 price barrier. That means this is more expensive than the F-Note 707, which was the previously most expensive standard electronic drum set from a major company, and that gives you a massive amount of components. Yeah, this will be more expensive than the Roland option. So who's going to buy this sort of thing? Well, the same kind of person that will spend $10,000 on a Gibson. In my opinion, this is an enthusiast level kit. This is for people that just really love playing all the bleeding edge electronic drum technology. And right now, this is the most bleeding edge kit out there on the market. It's a very, very ambitious kit. I realize some people will probably think that this isn't really that complicated or that difficult to pull off. This is a really tough drum set to pull off. There's a reason why no one else has done wireless before, because it's tough, and somehow it works. I assume that some people will probably buy this for, studio work, laying down MIDI, laying down audio tracks, remote session work. I can imagine some people, playing this live. However, I wouldn't use this in smaller venues where you're close to the audience because, But yeah, there's definitely going to be use cases for this. However, it's not trying to be an Alesis Nitro or a TD-17. This is not a drum set for the masses. It's an ultra high-end enthusiast level kit that some people will just be dying to buy, and other people, they'll know right away, they'll know immediately that it's not for them. So it's definitely a drum set of extremes. However, I have had a ton of fun playing this. I'm not in the budget price range to afford one of these or anything like that, and also I prefer rubber cymbals. But of course, that's what Roland's drum sets are for. Roland owns DW, by the way. So Roland basically has a whole spectrum of drum sets now. Got the pad-based stuff on the one end of the extreme. They've got the other drums with metal cymbals on this other side. And the VAD line sits right there in the middle. So there's an electronic drum type for every single kind of person out there from Roland and from other competitors as well. By the way, if you guys want me to cover like some ultra specific details about this drum set and like a part 2 of this or a Q&A sort of thing, let me know. I have a limited amount of time with this drum set before I have to ship it back to DW, and it's probably going to find its way to like a drum store somewhere as like a showroom floor model. If you have questions, let me know and I'll see if I can figure out the answer. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.